we open with esteemed PhD candidate. The College of Deans of this university, represented by us, has read your PhD thesis and the propositions that go with it, and we are ready to hear you defend it. Please be seated. Does anyone in the audience wish to exchange ideas with the PhD candidates? If not, and I now look at the screens, we should have online our international guests in the room. And otherwise we improvise and we do it differently. Yes, we see the screens. Online screens. We have international guests. We have a committee of FRIES members, and we have international guests online available here today. A warm welcome to you, and a warm welcome to this PhD defense. And I would like to open the defense by giving the floor to Dr. Azam Khatam, previously from York University, Canada, and now reviewer from the journal Globus Review, to ask your questions. So, Professor Khatam, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay. First, I congratulate Hamid for the interesting research that you have done, and I found it in some part very comprehensive. I saved my time just to point to two questions that I have for you at this stage. The first one goes to the review of the books that you have done, the school books at elementary and high school level, and the knowledge that these books provide with the students on disasters. It is a comprehensive review of the books, and it was really interesting to know that at different levels there is a knowledge circulating in our schools in Iran among different groups of students, different types of schools, and at different levels. But my question is that if this material, if we look at the development of this material through time, what would be the main point? At which phases they decided to develop this material? And if you think to assess the impact of this education just by looking at the children who were suffered from the disasters in recent years, for example, the flood or the last earthquake that we had, and the number of the children who we have access to that, who were deceased or were severely harmed by this disaster. Can we find a way to assess the impact of this on the harmness of the disasters for the children or their deaths? Is it possible to actually take a further step in this route and look at this? If we have a history of the material that provided with the student at different schools. The second question is about the budget, your review about the budget of the government. It is interesting that you have chosen to look at the budget, but if we, and you came to this conclusion that budget mostly have gone to the phases of recovery and response, not the preparedness. How you generalize your result in this part to and take it to the next step and say that the government focus is on response and recovery and not preparedness. I ask this question because allocating budget to recovery and to response, because they are more expensive than preparedness measures, could be misleading. If you can develop more on this aspect, that how you connect these two issues together, the budget and the whole policy, how you take this result in this part to the whole issue, I appreciate.
Thank you, Professor Khattam. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, highly learned opponent, for very nice questions. About the first question on school textbooks for children in Iran and how they presented information about natural hazards to children. I can say yes, I reviewed, during my thesis, I reviewed the old textbooks from 60 years ago until now, but I didn't publish in an article because it is not possible to bring all of data from different phases of the publishing school textbooks. But I found that in different generations, textbooks information were changed. For instance, before the revolution 50 years ago, most of school textbooks in Iran focused on some diseases, but not so many such hazards such as earthquakes and flood, because the most problem at that time in Iran was some diseases and infectious diseases. The new generation of the school textbooks for children, those focused on natural hazards in Iran, especially earthquakes. It was after the earthquake of Bam that more than 30,000 people died in that earthquake in Iran 20 years ago. So the information in school textbooks were changed because most of focus went to transferring information about natural hazards to textbooks. So I can say yes, in different time during last 50 years, 60 years in the modern education system in Iran, information were changed, but this school textbooks that I published in this chapter mostly focused on the last 20 years. And the another question is about how we can assess the impact of the transferring information via textbooks. I can say that the education and preparing children for disasters and disaster education is not only possible with only one type of education. So we have different type of education: formal education, informal education, and non-formal education via textbooks and lectures in a school, drills in a school, and also from radio and television. So the risk perception, risk awareness, and preparedness of the children is a combination of using different tools and different sources for finding information about natural hazards. My aim in this thesis was that finding different sources those children are learning about disasters, and the combination of them, how they prepare children for emergencies, such as school textbooks, policies, drills, and, for example, earthquake drills and shakeout drills in schools, and how we can, and at the end, one of the future direction of this study is studying on the impact and outcome of these programs, including school textbooks.
Thank you.
Yeah. One question remained.
We take other answers another time.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
I move to online and see whether online is still here or whether online, unfortunately, is no longer available.
I think online is still here.
Fantastic. Then I call upon Professor Gerald Malone from City University, New York, the United States, to ask your question.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Ahmed, congratulations on getting to this point as a candidate. My question is, really about what did you find to be in your research the most surprising findings, and how, if at all, were those surprises, if you will, able to help you think about future research that you may engage in this topic?
Thank you very much, highly learned opponent, for your question. In my opinion, the most important finding of my study that in the national level, policy didn't respond well to preparedness for disasters in Iran, because always one of my research questions was finding that is the claim of the government is true, that we are preparing children for emergencies. And it was interesting that even they are claiming that we are preparing people for disasters, they are not allocating budget for this important aim. And we know that every program needs budget and a structure, human resources, equipment, and without budget it's not possible to prepare people for emergencies. So it was very interesting for me that we found that there is not enough budget, they are not focusing on emergency, and they problematize the issue disaster strike, not disaster preparedness. Thank you.
That's great. I want to just urge you also at some point when you're doing your future research, check out some of the disaster preparedness work of Professor Martha Bragan, who is a colleague of mine at Hunter. She's done a lot of work in the area of disaster preparedness in African countries. So maybe an interesting comparison.
Yeah.
Did it answer your question, Professor Malone?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thanks, Ahmed. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we stay online, and I call upon Professor Hesam Sayidin from Iran University of Medical Sciences to ask your question. Professor Sayidin, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and first of all, I want to congratulate to Hamid actually for preparing this important piece of work. I want to back to the question which Azam asked. In chapter 4, Hamid, you said that regarding 100-year policy, you selected budgeting criteria, and just you have analyzed the Iranian annual budget. I'm not sure why you haven't select other criteria for preparation and mitigation laws, for example, for exercise insurance, organization in disaster management in Iran. My first question is this, because budgeting is not, although it's very important, but we have lots of other criteria in terms of policy making in Iran for disaster management, actually disaster risk management. This is my first questions. And the second question is regarding to chapter 5, which you have evaluate Iranian informal education. Which approach you have used for data analysis, whether it is thematic or because it was not clear for me, or framework analysis, and also how did you reach to data saturation in this field?
Two questions. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you so much, highly learned opponent, for your questions. The first question about why I focused on budget for analyzing policy. So there are different documents and policies that it's possible to focus on them during the policy analysis. I learned that and I found that the most important regulation and the most important document and policy in every government is budgeting. Because in the budgeting, you can find that the government really want to conduct a program or to want to do something. So I focused on budget analysis. In addition, before my work, there were some document and policy analysis on the preparing vulnerable people, such as your valuable article about policy analysis of disaster preparedness for vulnerable groups that I used from your valuable article also in my thesis. But until I didn't see any other work about using budgets for policy analysis. So I wanted to find, because also there are some rules that usually, because they don't have money, they don't have budget, they are not conducting the government. I want to find that the budget went to which programs and how they spend their money. Then I can find the preparedness, response, mitigation, and recovery phases in the budget, and then I can find how the government problematized really in different provinces in the whole government, and what's the problem they represented to be. About your second question that you mentioned, which data analysis I used in chapter 5, I used the qualitative data analysis, and I synthesized data for qualitative data analysis. I used different data from different sources in my work, and then I synthesized them. And because it was a stakeholder analysis for interviewing with different people, for example, focus group and interviews with the different organizations, those are engaged in the programs for preparing children, such as Iranian Red Crescent Society, Crisis Management Organization, Medical Emergency Services, and Ministry of Education in different levels, from the Deputy of Minister to the local level with different people. I interviewed with them. So data saturation came from the availability of people, and also I tried to cover all of governments, all of the organizations, those are engaged in the programs. And I tried to find all of people who are active, especially in the national level, in programs. In the local level I interviewed with different people, and it was, so I started asking questions from local level, then I went to the asking questions from the, for example, Deputy of Minister, so in the local level I found this finding, and what do you think this problem? And then I came back to the local level to asking and to validating that. So it was going and asking questions in different levels. I asked from different people, and also from the students, to find the challenges of the programs, because my aim from this article, from this chapter, was finding challenges of conducting different programs, especially two programs, the earthquake drill, and another one is blood rest drill in the schools. I thought that it was enough for finding, and after the collecting data, I presented these data to different people in different organizations. I had access to different people in different organizations. I thought, okay, these are the data I collected from different sources. Do you think they are true or not? So for checking them, I asked for myself, I checked them, peer check, and also expert check from different organizations, and they modified the data that I collected before. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If my understanding is correct, online guests have now asked their questions, and I think that we can now move to the professors who are here in the room. And the next one to call upon is Professor Valentina Gallo to ask your question. She is professor from our own faculty.
Thank you very much. So thanks a lot for this very interesting dissertation. I enjoyed very much reading it. And I was particularly impressed by your approach of using disasters as a whole unity, and disaster preparedness as a unique entity. Although I imagine there are many common factors, but also some specific disaster or hazard-specific factors in preparedness. For example, preparing for how to react to a tsunami might be different from how to react to a flooding. And then I went on learning about budget restrictions and problems, which I'm sure is not only Iranian problem and can be seen in many other places, and it might be a possible common problem. So I was wondering, how would you sort of reflect upon and assess this sort of trade-off of the need of a comprehensive disaster preparedness on one hand, but on the other hand, having some urgency, which are related to the place where people live and the situatedness of the context. So, for example, training for a tsunami in Switzerland might be less of a priority than other type of training. So, but what's your reflection on this, and what would you suggest to reconcile these two?
Thank you very much, higher learned opponent, for the question. Yes, I use all hazard approach in the thesis that maybe hazards are different in sources, but they are endangering our lives same sometimes. So with learning some tips and some preparedness tips, for example, having a preparedness kit, or for example, learning how we can evacuate the place, maybe we can prepare ourselves for different hazards, including tsunami, including earthquake or fire or everything. So maybe it's possible to not naming or calling the emergency, for example, an earthquake drill. We can say that, okay, these skills you need to learn because it will help you to different hazards, including human-made hazard or natural hazards, so you should learn it. So in my opinion, the government approach to the preparedness should be like that, all hazard approach, to teaching some tips for protecting themselves for all hazard for different hazards. And another thing that is important is this is true that maybe some countries are prone to some special hazards and they are less prone to some other. For example, in my country, Iran, we are prone to flood, earthquakes, but less to tsunami. One thing is climate change caused to changing the type of disasters and emergencies. For instance, even in my country, that is some very dry country, we have shortage of water. In recent years, we are facing different floods. So we found in the evaluation of programs and in school textbooks that the government didn't focus on flood preparedness and only focused on, for example, on earthquake preparedness. And then 3 years ago, we had a big flood that made problem in 28 provinces between 31 provinces in Iran. Also 1 to 2 months ago, same thing happened, and we found that people are not prepared for that because the government didn't think that maybe they should prepare themselves for the future upcoming hazards. In addition, people move. For example, I moved here to the Netherlands. So many other people are moving to another country, and if we don't, at least we don't give them information that there are different hazards and you should prepare yourself. If you are not going to another country, you should prepare yourself to know before what are hazards maybe you will face, and you should be prepared for that. For example, Tilia Smith, a student that lived in Britain. So Britain and UK maybe they are not have so many tsunamis, but she learned it in the textbooks, and then she went for a trip to Thailand, and then she saw the signs of the tsunami in the beach, and she warned to other people in the beach in Thailand that I can see there is a sign of the incoming tsunami, and she warned, and she saved the life of people, different people on the beach, more than 100 people. So it will good to preparing children for different hazards. As you mentioned, we should prioritize, but we should have an all-hazard approach to our work. So I try to present and indicate these gaps in textbooks, in policies, and in programs. If the government are investing on these programs, if they want really to, and I know that they want really to prepare people, they should have an all-hazard approach to better well-being of people, especially children. Thank you.
Did that answer your question?
Thank you.
It did. Good. Next, I call upon Professor Casper van den Berg from our own faculty and our own university to ask your question.
Esteemed candidate, allow me also to extend my compliments to the work that you've done. I've read your manuscript with great interest, particularly, of course, the component where public policy is concerned has my big interest. And I would like to invite you to reflect on certain aspects of your research that have to do with the transferability of your approach and of your findings. As a comparativist, when I read a single country study, the question that normally stays with me is always how much of what we see here is country specific and how much of what we see here could be transferred to a country setting with a different institutional makeup and or with a different dominant culture. And of course, in chapter 2 of your dissertation, your literature review, you go beyond Iran and you take in the literature from many other localities, but in your own empirical work, the focus is on Iran. And I would be interested in a reflection from your side. That would be my first question. What your expert view is on how much of your findings are basically limited to the Iranian setting and how much we could expect to see also in other systems, and what policy-wise we could learn from that, for instance, in this part of the world.
Thank you very much, highly learned opponent, for your valuable question. About the transferability of studies, I can say that from the first time that I thought about it, the title of the project, that Preparing Children for Disasters, I thought because there are not so many studies on preparing children for emergencies. So I thought maybe with conducting this project, maybe the other researchers in other countries will be motivated to doing such research. And so I tried to design the methods of research to be replicatable by other researchers. For instance, using the budget as a data source for policy analysis, I think it was something that is replicable by other researchers in other countries. So I tried to, in this chapter, in this article, I tried to explain every step for the policy analysis, that I use the policy systematically. I searched documents and budgets. I use different keywords for finding the budget and documents, and I screen them. I enter them to the MaxQD software or for the qualitative analysis, and using from the method that what the problem represented to be, WPR approach, that usually people are focusing on different aspects of policies, but I try to focus on this aspect of the policy, what's the problem represented to be, what's the intention of the government, what was the intention of the policymakers from this type of designing policies. So from this, for example, for this chapter, it is indeed replicable by other researchers. Or another chapter about the school textbooks analysis. I published 3 articles from this type of, but I brought one of the articles in this book chapter. But I published 3 articles from this type of this method. And besides of that, I produced a method for the content analysis of school textbooks to finding natural hazards in them. And my aim from developing a method was that I introduced to other countries, to other researchers, to go to find how their government, how their education system represented the natural hazards and disasters in their textbooks. And I think I was successful in this aim, because until now, after only 1 year, I saw that some people are citing this article, this method, and they're using this method to finding representation of natural hazards in their textbooks, such as Indonesia and other countries. And I also saw that different international organizations are using from the findings of this study, such as UNICEF and World Health Organization, from the findings of this study and this thesis. So I'm happy that at least I could do not only focusing on my context in Iran, because my aim was focusing on well-being of children in the whole world, but I needed one context for data collection, so I used in the context of Iran, but it's really replicable by other countries.
Thank you so much. So indeed, your approach and your methodology can be applied in other contexts as well. Yes. But then if we zoom in on the substance, basically, if we look at your findings and your conclusions, which part of those conclusions do you think are Iran-specific, and which parts of your conclusions can be are sort of universal, if we can even use that term, can be directly used as policy recommendation also elsewhere, irrespective of the institutional makeup or the dominant culture in which they manifest themselves?
Yes, thank you. I think findings from the all chapters, especially chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4, are really useful without looking at the context. In chapter 2, I tried to find different approaches and different challenges of disaster education programs in different countries in the setting of school. So I think it's really useful for other countries. The other chapter about the policy, budget policy analysis. So I found that the share of the preparedness and mitigation are less than response and recovery. So in my opinion, the other countries can use from this approach and from this finding to look at their gaps and how they are designing policies. And also organizations can go for advocacy about their type. So I think this is also an important way without looking at the context. And the school textbooks also, I tried, because at the same time I was a researcher on children preparedness, and because I worked for the Red Cross, somehow I'm expert on the disaster preparedness. I can see that, so I'm not humble now, but yeah, somehow I'm expert on disaster preparedness. I tried to brought some different, so I told that what are the gaps in the school textbooks. I told, yes, the textbooks should cover this mental health and psychosocial support. They should have gender and diversity. And so the combination of these findings, I think, is useful for other contexts in other countries. How I categorize school textbooks, how I categorize different emergencies, how I categorize disasters, and they can use from this categorizing of the findings in their studies. Only the final chapter about the challenges of the programs in Iran are a little more about the context, because challenges are about the program and program are in the context. But at the same time, later researchers can compare the challenges in Iran, this type of categorizing, and how I use themes and sub-themes for finding challenges, because I use for categorizing the findings in this chapter and challenges, I use from disaster studies keywords, for example, humanitarian logistics or advocacy, inter-organizational coordination or intra-organizational coordination. So I think that the type of categorizing of themes is very helpful for other researchers in other countries and also policymakers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shall we follow up with the next one? Thank you for your answers and thank you for the question, Professor van den Berg. So our next questions are from Dr. Mijntje ten Brummelaar from the Faculty of Behavioral and Social Sciences from our own university. The floor is yours.
Dear esteemed candidate, congratulations with the fantastic work you have done, and also what a great pleasure to be here today and celebrate in your defense of your thesis. I would like to hear your thoughts on the following aspect. In your research project, you have spoken with many different stakeholders and you have included many different perspectives in your research project and in your thesis. And what I would like to hear from you is for future research, which lessons do you have involving children and young people in research projects, and which ethical considerations should you take into account when you are researching together with young people?
Thank you very much, very learned opponent, for the question. About future lessons for involving children in research and studies, I think with this project I raised so many other questions for the future direction of research, that how we can involve children in the whole designing studies and also designing the programs for preparation for disasters. For example, I found that the disaster education in Iran is mostly traditional. They are using school textbooks, they are using radio, television sometimes, and lecture in the schools, but we cannot see the technology and innovation in the disaster preparedness, not only in Iran, but in other countries, because in the second chapter, I found that in other countries also they have the problem, and also in Iran. So the future direction could be what could be the role of the emerging technologies, such as using virtual reality, augmented reality, and other tools for preparing children. What could be their role in disaster preparedness, and also what could be their deficiencies for preparedness. So one of the future directions is finding the other approaches for disaster preparedness in Iran and other countries. And the ethical consideration for using children is a very good question, because always I was talking with myself that at the same time approaching to children is not easy, to asking about them about how they are preparing for children. Are they satisfied with this? Because at least in programs in Iran, they didn't include in the designing programs. So nobody asked them that, are you okay with this type of the education or not? Are you okay with this type of the disaster earthquake drill or not? So I wasn't okay also with researching about it. So asking them that, what do you think about this type of education? But later I answered myself, we should include them for disaster preparedness, because it's about their life, it's about their well-being, it's about their improvement. So I think in the future it will be good to, for ethical consideration, to asking the children idea in the whole project about designing the project, then formulating the question and the evaluation of the programs in the whole system. In addition, children are not only one group. When we are talking about the children, we are talking about the different groups of children, including children with disabilities, children who belong to ethnic minorities, refugee groups, and so many other groups. There are so many intersectionalities, and it made children more vulnerable. And I'd like to, if I continue this project on preparing children for disasters, I'd like to involve more groups of children in the education, in the disaster preparedness studies, and studying on them, because I should be more, I think it will be very more helpful to having some solutions and recommendations for different groups of children with different needs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I call upon Professor Matt Kohler of our own faculty and our own university. Professor Kohler, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Esteemed candidate, please accept my congratulations for this tremendous achievement. What strikes me as I read through it is the conclusion and how it's structured. This looks really unique from other dissertations I've read. You have recommendations for policy, practice, and research, which really epitomizes actually a lot of the philosophy at Campus Friesland. And it really underscores your focus on balancing science and impact. So I found that very admirable. I do have one related question. Although I come from outside your field of expertise, I'd like to hear your thoughts on something you wrote on page 124 about your recommendations for practice, and it was related very much to the last question. Regarding participation of children in disaster preparedness programs, you write, quote, disaster preparedness programs should be designed and implemented for children and with the participation of children. Children must be involved in all stages of the program, including needs assessment, design, program implementation, and program evaluation. That sounds really nice and compelling. However, I would like to know if you have any thoughts on how that could be implemented in practice. And I heard part of the answer in your response to the last question, of course. But not only from a methodological perspective, but also scientifically, how would you know if you really achieved this successfully?
Thank you so much, highly learned opponent, for the question. So I raised this question because in the chapter 5, I found that in the conducting different programs for children, they didn't include in the designing the programs. So I asked, for example, from children or asked from the different stakeholders, how do you use the perspectives of children in the conducting programs, and they told that we didn't do that. So I found from this type of interviews and focus groups that children, they hadn't any role in the whole process of preparing themselves for disasters. But according to the literature of child studies, I think it is very necessary to include children because when we want to work for children, we should include them for their work. So I recommended to the government to include children in the whole process of policy evaluation, policy design, evaluation, and also the conducting and the organizing the programs itself.
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
Yes, you can.
So can you have a concrete example of how that looks and what impact that has?
Yeah. So it was a recommendation, but when I'm saying that we should include them in the whole, so for example, as a person in the Red Cross and Red Crescent Society, when we want to conduct a drill for them, we should, for example, when we have a meeting with different stakeholders, one of the members of this meeting with the stakeholders are children themselves. For example, when the organization want to design the program, disaster drill, earthquake drill, we can ask, is this earthquake drill, do you think it's proper for children, or do you think it's a little less scary? Or how do you perceive this type of preparedness for yourself? So they can participate in the whole this designing the process, and also researchers can do that, because when the researcher want to research on the evaluating the program, they can invite the children. What is the question? Do you think what was the problem? And then we are asking from themselves, we can formulate the research question, and then we can ask from them how we can collect data to finding the results for how we can collect data for finding and for answering to this question. They can say maybe the questionnaire is not a good idea. Maybe you can invite us for a play or for some competition to art play, for example. There are different types of or you can invite us as the person who asking from others. So there are different tools. So inviting them in the whole process of research, study, and conducting, I think it will be very helpful for them.
Thank you for that very complete answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd now like to return to Professor Casper van den Berg for a follow-up question.
Esteemed candidate, yes, sometimes it's good to have one more question in the back pocket. And actually, I wanted to follow up on one of the things that you said right at the beginning of this defense, that rather than focusing narrowly on natural hazards, you're also interested in natural hazards plus all other types of man-made hazards, so to say. And I thought about this while I was reading your dissertation, because we're talking about preparedness of children for, well, the focus is on natural disaster circumstances. We're talking about the empowerment and the resilience of children under precarious circumstances. And particularly with disaster circumstances, in your book you summarize them as sudden and serious disruptions of various kinds, where particularly children are exposed to scarcity and to vulnerability. But I'm also thinking about two other types of precarious circumstances that children can find themselves in, such as exposure to violent conflict, thinking about war situations, but also maybe socioeconomic deprivation, which is different from natural hazards in the sense that usually it's not so sudden, but it's still disruptive. and children live in scarcity and vulnerability, so to say. So my question here is, can you conceptually reflect a little bit more on what we might see if your approach would be widened to also these kind of circumstances of precariousness for children outside just natural hazards?
Thank you very much, highly learned opponent. At the first, when I was thinking about the whole idea of this thesis, my idea was all hazard approach, as I mentioned before, including natural hazard and human-made hazards, such as human-made hazards such as explosions, factories, war and conflicts, nuclear or CBRNE, nuclear and CBRNE events and disasters. But according to the political situation in my country, so I consulted with some people, and I was thinking that maybe bringing those hazards such as war, conflicts, CBRNE will be a little political, and maybe I will find some challenges in interviewing with people in different levels.
And that needs to end this defense with a big breath of air. Esteemed candidate, the College of Deans will withdraw for some time to consider its decision. Esteemed PhD candidate, the College of Deans of this university, represented by us, after reading your PhD thesis and the accompanying propositions, and after hearing you defend it, has decided to award you the PhD degree at the University of Groningen, which you desire. Your primary supervisor, Professor André Zwitter, is authorized to award you this honor in the customary fashion.
But before I do my duties, I would like to ask co-promoter Dr. Sepide Yousefzadeh to give the laudatio.
Thank you very much. Dear Dr. Sadiri, let me first start with congratulating you with the wonderful job that you did throughout your PhD and today. As I was preparing for this note, I revisited my files to remember how you were introduced to us. In July 2019, I had a conversation with Dr. Monica Lopez, where she talked about a PhD candidate, you, from the University of Social Welfare and Rehabilitation Sciences in Iran, and she said you were willing to do a double doctorate PhD. She spoke so highly about you, that you were part of the European Scientific Association on Rehabilitation and Family Care for Children and Adolescents, and you very well were appreciated in that network. And she said that you had already published a very good paper in a highly ranked journal. Dr. Lopez was exploring the possibilities for funding and supporting you in doing the double doctorate PhD, and suggested that I explore the options at Campus Friesland just in case. Your resume, experiences, and list of publications were absolutely impressive. So I approached Professor Casper van der Berg, who was leading the graduate school back then, and discussed the possibilities of having us supporting you. And in February 2020, we had the approval to hire you as a double doctorate PhD for 1 year. And we were hoping to have you in Leeuwarden in spring that year. But soon after, we were all hit with the pandemic, and we had to delay that process. You joined us in last October and worked in an absolutely fast and impressive way. We had a nice and smooth start when you joined us, and we had several meetings, but soon we had to go back to the online meetings again. During your work with us, your approach to research was very critical, and you were determined to identify the shortcomings in protecting children by responsible actors. I remember our several conversations where I would refer to the macro-level challenges and geopolitical limitations, including decades of sanctions that constrain disaster preparedness and allocating resources to reduce the risks. Your passionate argument was always that children should be protected regardless of everything. You showed a careful dedication in working on different chapters of your thesis. We, as supervisors, had different rounds of comments and feedback on chapters that we worked together. And each time, you worked on modifications in no time. In your research on local context, you had a very nice focus on developments in disaster response and preparedness, while also reflecting on global level updates and changes. You nicely linked local with global. You showed an impressive knowledge about initiatives in different parts of the world in improving policies to reduce children's vulnerabilities and to improve response to disaster. In the meantime, your mastery over the local context of this research and its nuances is a great showcase on how local gaze in conducting research could contribute in producing knowledge in a distinct and unique manner. During your work at Campus Friesland, you were a dedicated colleague and co-worker and were always ready to help with tasks that were beyond your PhD. You helped with supervising bachelor students in their projects and their bachelor thesis. You helped me in teaching classes, and you designed and implemented a disaster simulation for bachelor students. So I can speak for all of us, the supervisors and promoters, to say that you impressed us and with what you did and what you achieved. And your efficiency, enthusiasm, and achievements is amazing. It is sad that you will be leaving us, but we are happy for new opportunities that are unfolding for you, and we wish you all the best.
I may now invite you to all stand up, please. I will speak this formula in Dutch. Het kracht van de bevoegdheid, ons bij de wet toegekend, volgens het besluit van het Collegium voor Promoties van deze universiteit, verklaar ik, professor Dr. André Zwitter, u, Dr. Hamed Sedigi, te bevorderen tot doctor en u alle rechten te verlenen die u door wet of gewoonte aan het doctoraat aan de Rijksuniversiteit Groningen zijn verbonden. Als doctor belooft u in de toekomst te handelen naar de Nederlandse gedragscode wetenschapsbeoefening? Please, sit down. Now that I have done my duties, it is my pleasure and honor to congratulate you.
Thank you.
Doctor,
thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
As proof of this PhD degree, I will present you with this certificate signed by the Rector Magnificus, secretary and supervisors, and sealed with the Great Seal of the University. But before doing so, very learned sir, it is my pleasant duty to congratulate you also on behalf of the College of Deans of this university on the degree that you have been awarded. Congratulations. We couldn't make them larger. This was the best size we can think of for a special occasion. And we're going to open it. I'm not sure how your Latin is. It's all in Latin, and it's all signed. My Latin is a little rusty, but maybe that for you, you can translate it later on. Thank you so much.
Let's stand in front of the table. Maybe in front of the table.
It's yours. Oh.
Let's stand in front.
Ja, we gaan naar voren. Zo. So we go front of the table. And you have the degree, not me. No, you have the degree.
Thank you.
Pictures. Now, before closing, because we're not yet closed, we have a small gift from you, which is actually from the University of Groningen. It's a Liebe an der Koordinator. So it's a book of friendship, basically. We also give that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for me, this is the honorable phase that I now declare this ceremony for closed.
Who's about the church? Yeah, no, thank you.